The gospel lesson is from Luke chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some of the women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all the things that the prophets had declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at their table, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking with us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. The word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. As you can hear from the background noise, not only are we reading the gospel today about being on a road. I'm on a road too, or almost on a road. The parsonage just behind me is the highway, and I imagine that the disciples who were walking along didn't have this kind of noise that they were listening to, but they didn't need to, because they were filled with their own noise, their noise from inside them. They were sad. We're told that they were overwrought because they were so upset about the things that were happening or had happened within the last few days in Jerusalem. And as they walked along, it didn't take an information superhighway like we're depending on now. In fact, I think that for those of us who don't have the internet, I think that these lonely times would be even lonelier. But they didn't have the internet at all, and yet it made no difference in terms of how quickly the news was spreading. And we are given an indication of how quickly the news was spreading about this event that had occurred, because when this stranger that they see on the road approaches them, and seems to not know what has occurred, they immediately respond, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who didn't know, who hasn't heard about Jesus of Nazareth? How could that be?" So we know that the news was traveling fast, but the news was unclear. The news wasn't something that they could at that time feel as happy about as we do now. Instead, they were concerned because they didn't understand what had come to pass. So as they walked along, these two disciples, Cleophas and his friend, as they walked along, Jesus spoke to them about everything in the scripture that pointed to Jesus having been the Son of God, the one who was to come to redeem them. And they were skeptical. They didn't completely understand. They knew their scriptures. They knew what they should have been looking for, but it didn't seem to them that the Jesus that they had known fit the bill for the one who was to redeem Israel. So as they walked along, they remained confused, even though the stranger who was walking with them was explaining bit by bit all of the prophecies that had led to Jesus of Nazareth becoming Jesus the Christ. As they began to see that they were closer to their village and they realized that the stranger who was walking with them was about to go on ahead, they said, "Please come with us." Apparently they had enjoyed the walk. They had enjoyed the time that they had spent with this stranger. They had found him compelling, perhaps, and they wanted him to follow them back to their homes, back to their home village. But it wasn't until they sat down and enjoyed a meal together that their eyes were open, we are told, and that they found that indeed the one that they had been walking with, this stranger that they had seen, was Jesus of Nazareth. And as soon as they realized that, he was gone from their presence. But they spoke with one another and said, "Weren't our hearts burning as we walked along? It was him, and we didn't even have any understanding that that was Jesus who was walking with us." And they were so moved by that they immediately got up and walked back to Jerusalem. Where are you walking right now? And where is it that Jesus might be walking with you? Well, we've mentioned that we're on the information superhighway, some of us, but that isn't the only place that we've been. We know from watching the news, we know from talking on the phone with our friends and our loved ones that we're all on this road together. And we don't understand it. It's confusing to us. There's information at times that seems to be contradictory. There's information at times that seems to be just flat out wrong. There are rumors, and there are parts of the story that we're hearing that just don't make any sense. And yet, brothers and sisters, I believe that on that road with us is Jesus. What does Jesus look like? Well, understanding that these two people who apparently had known Jesus very well weren't able to recognize him makes me think that perhaps I wouldn't recognize him at first when he appears on the road with me. Maybe he's the person who delivered my groceries last week. Maybe he's the person who left an uplifting message on Facebook. Maybe he's the one who's calling and saying, "These times are tough, but they will get better." Maybe he's one that you can't begin to recognize until you might have an opportunity to bake bread together with him. How would we do that when we have to be apart? Well, isn't hospitality something that extends beyond the moments that we sit down and eat together? Ideally, and I hope that it's soon, we will have a chance to be together and to share a meal together. But even when we don't, there are aspects of hospitality that transcend the moments that we spend sitting at the same table. When we're on that road together and we're able to be kind to one another, when we're able to look into one another's eyes and admit that we don't understand exactly what's happening, but we believe that a power greater than us, namely God, is in charge, and that no matter what misinformation the world may give us, it is God who is indeed in control through all of this. When we're able to share that knowledge with those who are around us, that is a type of hospitality. It's loving and kind, and it's what we ought to be doing. It's what we ought to be doing to everyone, whether we recognize their face or not. We're faced with an opportunity right now to turn inward, and turning inward can happen in two different ways. Occasionally, that turning inward will be followed by sadness and depression and the feeling that we'll never come through this. But turning inward also can be an opportunity that we take to be in prayer, to meditate on the good things that God has given us, to understand that throughout our lives there have been difficulties, and yet we know that we've been on that road with Jesus. Today, as we think about all of the uncertainties that we have in this world, I'd like to suggest to you that not only are we to get from this wonderful story about the stranger who appears to the people who are walking with him finally when they enjoy a meal together and they recognize that he is Jesus. But I'd like to take it a step further and suggest that when they know that he is Jesus, then they recognize that if they're going to be like Jesus, that they too need to go and tell the good news, just like he told them. And we, when we hear this story, need to remember that if we are going to be like Jesus, then we too need to be willing to walk along the road with others, whether figuratively or in reality, and be willing to share the good news with others. I found a quote today from Alton Garrison, who says that 80% of our congregants, that's people in the congregation, believe that church is for them to share God's love with each other. Now, on the surface, that sounds pretty good. I think we certainly should be sharing God's love with each other. But it's a little bit sad if we look into it more deeply and recognize that that means that 80% of people think that we should share God's love with those who already know God's love. Well, we wouldn't rule that out. None of us would fail to share God's love if we found ourselves walking along the road with someone who already knew Jesus. But I think the question is, what are we going to share with those who don't yet know Jesus? Is there a way that as you continue to travel this road, you might think about how to be among the 20% who want to share God's love with those who haven't met Jesus yet, with those who don't have hope for the future, with those who have no idea what any of the events surrounding them mean. Maybe it'd be possible to share God's love with those who don't know it yet. Blessed be you as you continue along this road, and blessed be those with whom you travel, those who know the love of God, and those who are waiting for you to tell them about it. Thanks be to God for His word to us this day. We have, following this, a music video with Steve Green singing a hymn called I Can See. I hope that you will find it as uplifting as I did. Thank you.